And it's live. Hey guys, thank you for joining me in this live demo of Photographer 4. Let me know if there's any issue with the sound or with the music, if it's too loud, and if you can see the screen as well. I will read the chat, and if you have any question, you can also ask in the chat. I will answer you right away. The reason I'm doing this live is because we have a lot of things to talk about. There are many new changes and features in Photographer 4, and I think a 10-minute video will not cut it. So I will just go through most of the new things, and also we're gonna just like take a scene and light it and place the cameras together, so you can maybe see what is my thought process and how to use Photographer in general. So let's start with enabling the add-on. So you just go to your preferences, which you can find in Edit Preferences here, and then I will just look for Photographer and I enable it. So one thing that you're going to find already in the preferences is you have a new little information box here that will show you if you have the latest version or not. So it's not like an automatic updater, but at least you will know if there's been an update. You can grab it from Gumroad or the BlenderMarket. Right now it's showing me that I have a new version available. That's because I've cheated and I just like put something lower than 4.00. But yeah, we have better organized preferences now. So because everything was starting to get like so crazy, I've been adding a lot of things. So now it's split up in different types, and you have UI, which is pretty much the same as before, and we're going to talk about the UI right now. About the cameras, we have a new UI here. There was a lot of settings here, it was getting cluttered, so I've decided to take a different approach, which is like when you have a camera, you have this Q menu or this like quick menu that has all the most important information for your camera. And that's pretty much what I want to have when all the panels are closed. Like I can see just at a glance what's my camera settings. So I'm shooting with a full frame. I'm using a 85mm lens. It's at f1.4, and then my focus distance is at 1.2. Exposure, this is the EV value. This is an easy way to just like very quickly adjust your brightness in the scene without having to open all the panels. So this is the new UI that I'm always use, and you can hide that. Imagine, I know that by default Blender is a bit like conservative on the width of the panel, because I think it's really made to just display values like this. It wasn't thought as an add-on panel, so everything might be a bit jammed. So what you can do is, if you don't want to use it, you can hide it. It's up to you. And then those settings that were hidden, they will just go inside the panel. So it's up to you. You always have the option. The other settings are pretty much there. They were there before, so there is nothing new here. The only difference is that we have the LightMixer, which I will talk about later in the live, which you can decide if you want it inside the Photographer panel or if you want it to have its own panel, so like its own category here. So you can always change that. Then we have libraries, because now we're going to have some textures and some HDR libraries. I will show you. We have the cameras, exposure settings, light settings, and we also have a new thing, which is the default light settings, and then the render option. So let's talk about the cameras first. Except for this new UI, we have like some quality of life improvements. So you will see that it hasn't changed, but we have new options. When you're gonna hover your mouse over some buttons, you're gonna have some tooltips that are gonna show you more options. And I've tried to streamline the options by using the shift click. So for instance, before, when you wanted to target an object, like you wanted to point your camera at something. So let's say I want to point at the eye, then the eye will be at the center of the camera. Before, it was automatically attaching, like parenting these targets to the object. So as I would move the camera, I would move the object, then the camera would follow. This is an option now. So if I go back, and then if I either shift click when I press the button, or if I just click and then shift, then now it's gonna parent it to the object. And now my camera will follow if I move the object. So all those kind of small like quality of life improvements, those options that are not adding more clutter, not more buttons, but just you have to think that that's going to happen quite a lot in the UI. I will talk about it every time. We have also like for cameras, now this button will update and tell you which camera you have selected, but you can also shift click to select several cameras. And what I'm seeing is that it's not working. So that's a bug that will fix. Yeah, you can do it with lights. It works with lights. But yeah, you can shift click and you can control click, then you would just adjust your selection. So that would be the same in the cameras. Something is broken here. Anyway, go back to my previous camera. Yep. The biggest option now that we have, the Gumroad link is not working. Okay, good. I will update that. Thank you. So yeah, the new option, like the visual option for the cameras, is the depth of field. So you've seen maybe like different tutorials before to how to make your custom bokeh and create some nice shapes and stuff. And the way it works is that you have to place a plane in front of your camera and you have to adjust the scale, and it's a bit cumbersome. So I've tried to make it as easy as possible with those two options here in the depth of field. So you have two options. You have the optical vignetting and you have the bokeh texture. I'm going to start with the bokeh texture, which is the simplest one. Let me just revert that to one. I give you like a library of images that you can use. There's going to be a bit more since the release. Like the release is going to be around like Saturday or Sunday. I will make more textures since then. And what it does is that you can just pick a texture and your bokeh will get that shape. And you can, you can find whatever bokeh you like. If you want something that has a ring, you can use colored texture. Like this one has texture, so it has some color, so it has some chromatic aberration on the sides. And yeah, you can do whatever you want with it. There are two settings for it. There is this brightness multiplier, and what you may have noticed is that the render is getting darker as soon as I add my bokeh texture, and that's because the center of the bokeh is darker than white. So as your camera is going to render, it's going to just like multiply the brightness of the image by this value. So you can compensate it with this brightness multiplier. So the way I use it is that I just like turn on the bokeh on and off, and I see like, okay, is it making my image darker? No. So now I keep the same brightness, keep the same exposure, but it's adjusted for this texture. And you can also like rotate. So if I go with my heart shape and I want to rotate on the side, like you can do these kind of things. Yeah, it's super easy. It's gonna... So question about what about the size of the bokeh? The size of the bokeh is still going to be controlled by your camera aperture. So this is the depth of field value that you have here. It's going to be physically correct. Like if you use a wider aperture, then it's going to be a wider bokeh. You can always make a texture that will be smaller in the center. That would affect the size of your bokeh, but ultimately you are making the image darker and you are breaking the physically correctness. So when you make your texture, you have to think that it needs to fit in a circle that is from like the edges of the texture. What else? Yeah, I think that's about it for the bokeh. Yeah, I wanted to say like this is also going to work with your like the focal length and also the size of your scene. So it's just gonna adjust all those values depending on those settings. So you don't have to think about it. Like you just set your texture. It's gonna work for every focal length. One thing that you need to remember is that, and it's written in the tooltip here. If I can put my mouse on it, yeah. Yes, computational heavy feature. Expect longer render times. That's something to like, yeah, bokeh is expensive. If you use a bokeh texture, it's going to be also more expensive. It's going through a transparent plane. So if you have transparency depth, rays that are very low, like the count. If you go to the, I think, is it in sampling? No, light path. Light path, here you have transparency. If your transparency is below 1 or 2, then that's not going to work. So you have to use a value that is relevant. And the other one is that it requires a short clip start. And what I mean by that is that if I look at my scene, you may get some Z fading, which is like, maybe we can see it here. Like if the difference between the clip start and the clip end is too large, then you're gonna get some artifacts in the viewport. Actually, I'm not looking through the camera. I need to keep looking through the camera to see it. But actually, I don't see it. It's not that bad in that case. But yeah, something to keep in mind, that this value needs to be very low, because what I'm doing essentially is that I'm placing a plane right in front of the camera. So I need to adjust the clip start, and that will, like, if you have a large landscape with trees that are in the background, then there will be jittering. That's not going to affect cycles. Like, cycles doesn't care about those settings. It's only your viewport that's going to look weird. Thankfully, when you look through the viewport camera, then this has different settings in the view, so it's not going to affect your viewports, only when you look through the camera. Let me go back to something this, because we're gonna talk about, oh, I might go undo, yep. So let's talk about the optical vignetting. So optical vignetting is, it's an effect that happens, it's kind of the same as the bokeh, like it's something that is occluding your lens, but it's happening further than the focal plane. So what happens is that it's not gonna be uniform across the image. What you see here when you use, for instance, this heart, is that the heart has the same shape on the across the entire image, if it's in the corner, if it's in the center. Or optical vignetting is not going to do that. It's actually going to be different depending on how you occlude your lens. So what happens when you shoot movies, you always or you often use mate boxes. And mate boxes, let me find some image. A mate box is pretty much that. It's some flaps that you put in front of your camera just to block any light that would be shining inside and creating a lens flare on your lens. And those, when they are long enough, like, they start to be visible in, like, it's not in the frame, but just outside of the frame, and that starts to occlude the bokeh, everything that is a bit outside of it. So if we just turn on the optical vignetting, by default it's going to be using a round shape, and that's because you have some lenses that get optical vignetting from themselves. You don't even have to use a mate box. You already get optical vignetting. One that is famous is the Helios. So the thing that creates that swirly bokeh, that's because there is the lens hood itself is occluding the image. So the goal is to recreate that. And when you turn on the optical vignetting, you're gonna see, like, it starts like cutting the bokeh on the sides already, on the edges. And then if I increase the scale, then I'm getting that cat's eye bokeh shape. So that's the swirl that you see in the Helios or Petzval lenses. And yeah, same as for the bokeh, it's going to be connected to your focal length, so it's going to adjust, making sure that everything is set up. You don't have to think about the scale of your box that is placed in front of the lens. It's going to be user-friendly. And you can use whatever shape. So that's what I meant with the mate boxes. If you imagine that you place a mate box that has like a flap, so I'm just going to use like there's a flap at the top that is blocking a light from above the camera, so it doesn't shine into the lens. And you can see the difference between the bokeh texture and the optical vignetting. Only the top of the image is going to have those cuts, and the bottom ones are still going to be round. As a comparison, I can show you if I use the same texture. Well, it's not exactly the same, but pretty much. It's gonna cut the bokeh uniformly, so the entire thing is gonna be cut in the image. So this is not realistic. Like, you never really see that. You don't have a lens where you put that on the focal plane. So that's why it's separate as a optical vignetting. I have a video that a friend of mine has shot, which is pretty cool. You can see here in action. He has a camera and he has a mate box on top, and you can already see that the top is a bit darker already, and as he focuses out, you can see how the bokeh gets cut at the top. So that's exactly that effect. This is like an optical vignetting that's in front of the lens. So you just need to take a texture. In that case, I'm providing this one where I'm just saying like, okay, occlude the top of the image. You can use whatever you want. Let's say you occlude and the top and the left. So now it's cut on the left. And also because I have a round shape, then I'm getting the Helios swirly bokeh as well. So I'm getting all the three effects at once. Something to keep in mind is that it's actual vignetting, so it's also going to create like occlusion on your image. It's going to make it darker, like as you occlude and change the scale, it's going to make it darker. But I think it's realistic because it's going to feel like actual vignetting. I have other scenes that we're going to talk about where you can see it more like on an environment, how swirly it looks. Yeah, another thing to think about is I have like an example of a slice, and this is why we have rotation. So the slice would just cut your left side and right side. You can see it if I expand or if I lower the intensity or the scale of it. And when you rotate it, you can give like those kind of crazy effects. I know that some shoots like you do, like you can make those kind of crazy bokeh, like a lot of movies that they make for like perfumes, like fragrance and those kind of shots. Like I know Gucci, for instance, they have those super nice ads where everything is like out of focus and they're shooting through prisms and stuff, and sometimes they do those kind of crazy things. So you can do that. The reason why I want to show this one is that if you use a slice that is like not, I think it's not the same. I want to show you that it's not the same between using a straight one that you would rotate and one that is already rotated. You don't want to use that one. The reason is that the way the texture is going to expand in the UVs, it might just create some weird things on the edges. So I would say don't use that. Use the other one, like use a straight one and then rotate it. Like you can see here, like this corner, for instance, it starts to just be a bit like broken off because of the texture. I can show you maybe in this view, if I can find my camera. So what essentially it does is that it creates those boxes in front of your camera. So you're going to be seeing them in a scene. What I've done is that you're not going to see them if you're rendering another camera. It's going to hide the other camera boxes for you, so you don't really have to think about it. If I just make an environment that is a bit bright, this is what happens. I'm creating a box that occludes the camera, and in that case, the way the texture is extended, you see that it's not like a straight line. It's just like there's a zigzag because it's extending the pixels straight and not as you would expect. So that's why you use this one and then you rotate it and then you get what you want. So yeah, I think that's it for that scene. You can see the potential of using those textures. I will just move to another environment where we can see the swirly bokeh, and then we're going to talk about the lights. So yeah, CoNG. So I'm just want to show you like starting from scratch. I have just an HDRI that I captured in Japan, and what I do is I want to make some bokeh, like the ones that you have in the thumbnail. So I create a camera, and then bokeh is going to be depending on different settings. One is the focal length. The longer the focal length, the more bokeh you're going to get. In that case, it's going to be a wide lens because I want to show you the swirly bokeh. I'm going to activate the depth of field. I'm going to adjust the exposure because it's a night scene, so it's a bit dark. I'm going to do that. And then depth of field, I will just lower it to 1.2. And I'm still not seeing bokeh. So, okay, why am I not seeing bokeh? Because the focus distance is one of the most important settings that will create your bokeh. So if you want to create more bokeh in your scene, you have to get closer to your subject. That's how it works. Like if you're shooting someone and you need to put a focus at 1 meter, then you're going to get bokeh. If you put a person like 10 meters away, then you're not going to get any bokeh. So 1 meter, starting to see some bokeh. I'm going to exaggerate it at 0.5. And now I'm going to just add some optical vignetting. So it's going to be a bit light to begin with because it's just a round shape, but then I'm going to increase the value. And you can see how it affects, like it also creates some nice distortion right away from the effect. So now I'm getting some swirly bokeh. I was out of the camera. I'm gonna lock my camera to view. And I can also maybe just increase slightly the focal length. So now I can see more of the swirly bokeh on the corners. So that's as easy as that. Really, like you can add any texture in there. Those textures are coming from your library. So if you go to the add-on references here, you have library, and by default it's gonna set your path to your preset folder. So you know where you have your add-on, like you have scripts, add-on, and presets folders. So that's where they're gonna be. And you can change that, and you can point to any of your directories. You can also add your textures directly in that folder. You don't have to restart Blender or whatever. Like as soon as you're gonna click, it's gonna update and say, oh, you have 2 more textures in that folder. So you're gonna find them. And yeah, you have 2 folders, one for the optical vignetting and one for the bokeh. I think that's it for this feature. Again, like a lot of small fixes, just making sure that like everything is working fine from the version 3. There were some paper cuts that I've adjusted. And I think that's it for the cameras. Let's talk about the LightMixer now. I'm gonna go with my old bike, which you may have seen from 2 years ago in the first version of Photographer. Still not finished. And I want to make like a studio lighting for this one. So we have this LightMixer, and the LightMixer, it's like if you know Gaffer as an add-on, if you know light groups, like the goal is to be able to just very quickly tweak your settings of your lights in the scene. We have new buttons to create lights here, and those buttons are special. They are not like the default Blender buttons, and those buttons are also here in this menu. If you Shift A and you go to lights, you can see now you have those physical points and spot area. What's special about them? Those are the photographer buttons, so I do more stuff with it. And what I'm doing with it, and I think a lot of people have been asking for it, is I'm actually using some default settings. So before, when you create your light, it's always gonna use 10 watts, and that may not be what you want. And you create a sun and it's gonna use a strength of 1. It doesn't really make sense. So for instance here, if I want a sun and I want it to be using a lux, so I want it like realistically based, and it's gonna use the default values for the sun. Like I've set that up to be the default sun. You can use it, you can change the values for whatever you want. But that's gonna help you that as soon as you create a light, it's gonna be in the right order of magnitude, like the values. And if you don't want to use power, you can decide to use Candela, for instance. So I prefer to use Candela in general because it reacts nicely. Like if you have a spotlight, it won't change the brightness if you change the cone angle. But it's not values that you can easily find. You can find them for area light values. Like for instance, your screen monitor is most likely around 250 candela per square meter. But a light bulb will be in lumen. So you decide. I usually like use lumen or candela to my liking. And And also some settings for the EV lights, because I think some settings are completely wrong. Like the default settings for the custom distance, the fact that it's turned off, that just completely breaks the physically based light decay. And also the shadow bias, which by default is super high. Actually, I'm gonna just show you quickly what the shadow bias do. Just add a plane. I'm just gonna switch to EV. I'm gonna add a cube. Okay. And if I add an environment here, so the world, I can just add an environment. Oh, tells me that I haven't set up anything in my library. So I'm just gonna go into my photographer add-on, library. I'm gonna set a path here. I have my own HDR. Here you go. So now I have my HDR, and if I add a spotlight, and right now I think it's gonna be fine because I already have set up my default settings, but I will show you how bad it is by default. So I have my spotlight. I move it here. I'm just gonna target my object, so now I can just really move my light and it's still gonna target it. I'm gonna increase the intensity. I can do it with stops, so it's faster for me to just increase by 0.5 stops. And yeah, default values for the custom distance would be like turned off. So sometimes my light would cut off here, like it would not light the entire thing. And then my shadow bias would, I think, be 1. Yeah, 1. So what it means that I have this gap here, like it's not accurate at all for my objects. So I don't know why it's set to 1. The reason why we have this bias for real-time shadows is that at certain angles, like you're gonna get some shadow, what we call shadow acne. So you're gonna get these kind of artifacts on the side. And this is meant to help with that. The fact is that first, it's not even helping because I can still see some artifacts when I'm placing my lights. And also it's cutting my shadows. So I don't want that to be 1. And by default, I set it to 0.01, I think. So now I have like a proper connection of my objects. Some people might say like, yeah, but you shouldn't use that. Then you should use like a high bias and then use a contact shadow. And yeah, in that case, it does fix the issue. The problem with the contact shadow is that's a screen space effect. So sometimes if I just rotate around, then I'm getting some weird things like that's not aligned with my shadow, that's creating artifacts. It might just even disappear in some cases if I'm not looking at the right angle. So the contact shadows are good for some things, but they are not really accurate. So I would definitely recommend using a lower bias, and this is what the UI here does by default. It's gonna set your custom distance to a further distance, and it's gonna set your shadow bias to 0.01. You can also decide if you want to use contact shadows by default and set your settings here. So let me go back to that scene. And I'm gonna do, okay, so I already have some lights here, but I'm just gonna delete them. I don't want them. So let me find, where did I put my light studios? Here they are. It's turned off, so that's why it was removed. I'm just gonna delete those lights. Here you go. So let's go to EV for now. I think it's gonna be good. It's fast, I love it. I'm gonna add a plane. And I'm gonna turn off my environment. Right now I don't want it. So I'm just gonna turn it off with that little light button. And I'm just gonna add a spotlight. So now I don't see anything. So I'm just gonna move it like this. Again, I like to just target my light. So that's the same as the camera target. You can shift click if you want to parent it to the object. And then if you move the object, the light is gonna follow. In that case, I'm not doing it. So here I go. My light is really low in intensity, so I'm just gonna increase that. I'm gonna change the cone angle to something a bit wider. And yeah, I think you can see that that kind of cuts. That's the custom distance. Like, I'm not even, I think this is because the scene is using a 0.1 scale unit. That's why it's so bad. So I'm just gonna push it. Like now you see, like it multiplied my value, my default value of 40 meters by 0.1. So I'm just gonna put it back to 40. Now I have a proper light. Oh, what happened there? My light disappeared. It's all black. Okay, let's read. Oh, that's the cone, I think. The cone went to 1. That's why. I moved that thing in the middle by mistake. Okay, and then I'm gonna duplicate it. So you see that I duplicated it and I get a new light here directly. It's gonna scan for any light in the scene, and in the future it's also gonna scan for the emissive materials. So I'm just gonna, yeah, because I duplicated it, then the target was a bit off. Oh, let me just redo it. I'm just gonna retarget this one. Okay, so now I have 2 lights like this. Gonna increase the blend on both. This is pretty ugly, by the way. I'm not doing this to make it pretty. I'm mostly showing you like the potential of it. We're not gonna look at the ground in the cameras that I'm gonna place. And yeah, let's say that I'm not super happy. Like I don't want it to be a spotlight anymore. I think that I want it to be an area light. You can do that here by changing this light type. And you're gonna notice something which I hated before in Blender. If you changed a light type and your name was like spot, then it would just keep the same name spot. So you had now an area light that was named spot. So what I'm doing is that if you change the type of the light and there is the name of the previous type of light before, then it's going to rename it. So now if I change it to area, then it's called area 001. It's a bit cleaner. You know what type of light it is by just looking at it. It's much nicer. So yeah, I want this to be an area light, and I also want this one to be an area light because I think it provides a better lighting. I don't want to see the cone, so I'm just going to change it here to an area light. Cool. And I want to give some color, so I can either give it a color here by clicking on this swatch, or I can click on C and then you can change the color temperature directly here in the UI. So it's going to be more orange like this, and I'm going to select the other area light. Same thing, I want something bluer on that side, like this. The shadows are super dark because I'm not using cycles, I'm using Eevee. I would have to bake the irradiance. So for now, I don't really care about that. I'm gonna create another camera from this point of view. And I'm gonna just change something like this. And I will see how it looks in cycles. Okay, so it's a bit dark. I'm gonna adjust my exposure to something like 6 maybe. 6 is a bit high, so yeah, something like this. And actually, I don't want to see this one. I want it to be maybe bouncing lighting, but I don't want to see it. So I'm just gonna go in the visibility of this plane, and I'm just gonna hide it from the camera for now. Yeah, so that's how easy it is to use this LightMixer. And now let's say I want to solo one light. I don't want to see the other light. So I just like shift click on this one, and then I'm just gonna see my orange light. If I shift click on this one, just the blue light. If I shift click again, then it's gonna show me the lights that were enabled before. You can disable them, and by placing them into a collection, then you will have this collection box that you can enable or disable entirely, and you can collapse it. So you can organize your lights through collections. Like here I have my lights for the studio, and then I can imagine I can add, so lights, I'm gonna add a point light, which I'm gonna place like somewhere over here. I don't know, it's gonna be like a bit of a field light. So now you see that it's outside my collection because I haven't grouped it. I'm gonna group it to a new collection, which is gonna be my fill lighting, and now I have it in my list. And if I go in those, I can also change the colors. Like this is a new option. I think it's from 2.91. So I'm going to say this one is going to be my yellow light, and it's going to update here. And this one is going to be my blue. So you can nicely organize your lights in your scene like this. What else? So you may have noticed that I'm pressing a lot those buttons. These are the stops adjustments. You can always like slide in the middle, and if you want to change your type of unit, you can just select here in this option. You also have the different ray visibility, and you can also decide to turn off the shadows from your lights. This is working with Eevee, so if I change to Eevee, I have a different set of settings. And this is also working with LuxScore. So all those systems that are working with LuxScore, just something to keep in mind when you use LuxScore, like the physical lights from Photographer and LuxScore are very similar in terms of settings. That's because I was the one who added them to LuxScore, so I would recommend to not use the ones from Photographer because it's redundant. So I think it's better to just go into the add-on, and then you can decide to in light here you can use physical lights. And I have a tooltip as well. Recommended to disable this feature if you're using LuxScore. And that's also going to work with those settings. Like LuxScore is going to follow those default settings and everything. Yeah, that's it. The world, I think. So here my world HDRI was created before I had the LightMixer, so that's why it doesn't recognize it as a world HDRI. So you can just click that, it will create it for you. And what you can do as well is you can do whatever in the shader editor. So for now, I only have one environment texture, and the goal is that I'm gonna add in the future updates. I'm gonna add controls on the white balancing, on the contrasts, all those kind of settings that you may want for your HDRI. Right now it's not done, but it's coming. And what I'm doing with this is I'm just changing the texture. So whatever you want to do, also like the rotation is also based on that. So as long as you don't touch those nodes and you keep adding nodes, then you can. So if you want to add like a mix, RGB, and change your texture, or like a color ramp, you can do that. So it's still like for power users. Same for the depth of field. So by the way, the depth of field, that's not going to work with Eevee. The bokeh and optical vignetting are only for cycles. It's not going to work for LuxScore either because some nodes are not compatible. So let me go back to cycles here. Yeah, those are the same. If I go, I activate the optical vignetting, and then I'm looking for my camera, which is here. Inside, I have those parented camera optical vignetting box. And if I select the material for this object, you can find it here. And you can adjust it. Same, like, as long as you don't delete the nodes that are like needed, you can just change whatever. So for instance, okay, let's do it with the bokeh. I know that I had someone requesting that. So I have my dirty texture, and I want to make it more contrasty because I don't see enough of the contrast in the all the details are missing. So you can just here create a color ramp, and you're gonna use this texture as a factor for the color ramp, and then you can increase the contrast for it. So all of this is possible. Power to the user. I'm not gonna delete it as well. Like if you change something, like if you turn off the bokeh and then you turn it back on, it's just gonna reuse the same material. If you don't want to reuse the same material, you rename your camera. If you rename your camera, it's gonna create a new material because it thinks that the camera is different. Okay, so you want another type of bokeh. But if you just turn it on and off, it will just keep your materials. And I think that's it for this demo. Like there is yeah, there is a lot of new feature, and that's why oh yeah, I wanted to talk about that. Like, this is going to be a paid update. I think that Photographer 3 has lived like more than a year with updates and cool new features like the lens tilt and the focus plane and those kind of things. Now I had to rewrite a lot of things. I had to clean up a lot of the code and adding more features. So I think this is a new development cycle. So Photographer 3 is still going to be updated for maintaining compatibility to any new updates from Blender. So if you have like a 2.95 and that breaks Photographer 3, I will make sure that I fix that. But it's not going to get any of the new features. Those new features are going to come to Photographer 4, which is going to be slightly more expensive. So I think we're talking about like $5-6 more. And you can upgrade, if you bought Photographer, then you can upgrade just paying the difference. So you're just going to pay $5 or $6, and then you get all the new options and the new support, like the new development cycles that's going to last maybe, again, a year. Any feature requests you have, just send them my way, and I often do my best to implement them. That's it. I haven't seen many questions in the chat. I hope that everything is clear. I will make a demo video for the release this weekend, but it's not going to go in details like that. This was really to show you like a lot of the small things that have been done here. Then I will, oh yeah, I don't know. We can continue to do some 3D stuff. Otherwise, I can continue to work on my bike. Yeah, something that I want to show as well. Like if you want to keep your worlds, like every time you're going to change this texture, it's going to update the name of it. But it's still going to be the same world. And if you want to create a new one, then you just duplicate one, create a new world, and then you have both living next to each other. So change it to this one. Then you can swap between those. So that's it for this live, I think. And thank you for joining. And see you soon then.